So this is the Pyro Traveler. You get them and their constellations through the story, but I don't want to spoil that. Just do the quest and you'll get this character. So I was testing this Traveler on stream yesterday. Just to simply sum it up, this kit is kind of like a mini Mavuika, mini Xiangling. This tap E has off-field Pyro, but it won't actually do much if you're not in combat. Let me just run up to this poor guy, do this.
Oh my god! Wow!
There we go, and as you can kind of see, it basically applies off-field Pyro every 1 second in that small AOE. And what this burst does is it refuels your Night Soul, which is very important since that's what affects your skill duration. You can see here, the burst doesn't really do much, but it just restores the Night Soul. And to put it simply, you get about 12 seconds of off-field Pyro from this skill. The burst does have good multipliers, but that's not going to be too useful unless you're playing a team built around it. Plus, the only last thing you really need to know is this C1 here, which gives a 6% increased damage buff to your on-field character. And then if they're an Atlan character, it's 9% instead. Now you're probably wondering, what playstyles is this kit useful for? One team is Burgeon teams. So you know how Pipe Loom is pretty popular, and one of those reasons is that it's not annoying to play. Both Shinobu and Raiden have electro application on their skills, like these things here. It's very comfortable and casual to play. And now with the Pyro Traveler, we kind of have that too for Burgeon finally. Let's use Thoma as a comparison. Burgeon was never that popular, but if you were playing Burgeon, you probably was using Thoma. And Thoma's big thing is that in order to get his Burgeons, you have to use his burst. And you know how in general we prefer skill-based characters rather than burst characters, so that's quite nice. Plus the Pyro Traveler can trigger these Burgeons every 1 second, as long as you obviously have enough Hydro and Dendro application, which is quite nice. By comparison, Thomas can be almost as fast, but you do need to be constantly spamming normal attacks, and it is a bit more limited in regards to that. Now you might say Thoma has two roles, which is both being the Burgeon DPS but also being the shielder. But the thing is, this shield scales off his HP, and as you know, when you build for Burgeon, you have to stack EM, and on top of that you need Thoma's burst, so you have to stack ER on him, which means you don't have much room for building HP, which means in Burgeon teams, honestly, his shield has always been quite paper. So in my opinion, Pyro main character not having a shield doesn't make too much of a difference there, since you want a survivability teammate regardless, which is why I usually use someone like Kokomi, or you can use Barbara as well. But the biggest downside, and I guess it's a common theme throughout this video, is that the Traveler's range isn't great. In fact, it's actually quite terrible, honestly. It's nowhere near Shinobu's by comparison. Like, Shinobu's is not amazing either, but that is massive by comparison. I'll just show you right now, actually. So here's a demonstration. I'll use Nahida's burst, might as well. $29k Burgeons, 29k, and the AOE is okay. It's not the best, but it can get the job done, and that's with 700-ish EM. It's with a triple EM build, but the main reason why it's not higher is that I'm using Sacrificial Sword, which I kind of like the best because it lets you get 100% uptime on this skill. Otherwise you have this 18-second cooldown, and also you really want his burst in order to recharge his Night Soul points. This is a bit overkill though. I don't think you need anywhere near 230, but that's just the way my artifacts lined up. I have my EM build, but I also have lots of ER. Let me try and showcase this AOE difference though. So I got the job done, but the AOE was quite small. Well, you basically have to be right next to the cause. Whereas if I show you Toma, as long as you can get over the fact that you need to cast his burst and build him for energy. Oh god. Let me do that. There we go. You can see the AOE is just way bigger on Toma. Like the range of that is way bigger than the Pyro Travelers. And yeah, just for comparison, just to show why people like Hyper Bloom so much. Let me do that. Is that the Hyper Bloom kind of combines both. Obviously the blasts themselves don't have as much AoE, but you're getting the skill based attacks and the healing and just the bigger range of Hyper Bloom. So you can see the Traveler does improve on the old Burgeon teams in some regards, but it's still nowhere near what the Hyper Bloom characters have, unfortunately. But it's definitely a team archetype that you can play. Like you can use Barbara as well and probably get a team like this going. Now moving on to another team where you can play the Pyro Traveler is Overload teams. And you know earlier the C1 that I mentioned, the 6% damage increase? Well, you don't build an EM set with him this time. Instead, you can use the Natlan Scroll set. And this obviously, if you don't know, you'll get the 6% from the C1 plus 12% here plus 28% here. So 46% damage bonus to your carry. Since if you don't know, he basically acts as a Natlan character with the Night Soul points, even though he's not really a Natlan character. And you can play him with Clorinde, and you can play him with Raiden, teams like this. So we have no buffs yet. And the issue with this team is that he doesn't actually get the buff straight away. Probably have to do something like that. No, you still don't get the boss. Okay, by the time you get to Clorinde, he will have activated a reaction. And then there, as you can see, 40 Electro, 40 Pyro. So it's not straight away. I think his boss will be more quicker if you probably use Fischl or Raiden. Okay, when do I get the boss? Yeah. So you get the Scrolls boss before you switch to Raiden in this team. There we go. I mean, that was pretty smooth, not gonna lie. And this gives a nice middle ground for my testing where he doesn't buff your DPS as much as Bennett would. Obviously, the 46% damage bonus isn't going to match up to Bennett's huge attack buffs. But because he has off-field Pyro, you can refresh Chevrolet's overload buffs. And if you don't know, off-field Pyro is very nice in Chevrolet's teams because you only have 100% uptime on these buffs here if your team is constantly triggering overload. So on one hand, he doesn't buff as much as Bennett, but he can refresh the overload buffs. But on the other hand, he buffs a lot more than a teammate like Xiangling does, but obviously you're going to be missing Xiangling's pretty decent damage. Also to note, unlike Xiangling, I wouldn't really build EM for overload reactions on the Pyro Traveler, since this is because the Pyro Traveler has poor ICD on their elemental application, and obviously Xiangling can react with every single hit. This didn't matter for Burgeon teams since the Dendro cores will always get hit, but for older reactions like overload it does matter, unfortunately. Yeah, 393. So I hit 393 with his Scrolls buff. 336. So the Traveler is buffing Raiden's damage by like 17%. This is with engulfing, and I also use a I use an attack goblet. Okay, so I haven't got that much damage percent. So if you use the catch, and if you use an electro goblet, then you probably get a slightly less buffs from Pyro Traveler. I'll use Ali Fast to keep it fair. I'm not even going to use like a 5-star weapon or anything. And again, I have an attack goblet, so this is not even Bennett at his full strength. Oh, Bennett is a lot higher. 439. But I mean, you can see there, I kind of just one rotated it first try. So Bennett's about like 12% more damage than the Traveler. But the buffs will drop off, because in this team, you're not like refreshing the overload buffs. But then again, if you get the cheeky normal attack hit with Raiden, you can sustain the buffs for quite a while. Yeah, and also it's not circle impact, I guess. So you might be asking, where does Mavuika sit on that same scale? Well, for Clorinde, she basically is just better overall, since she's also an Atlan character, so you also get this scrolls buff on top of having much higher off-field multipliers than the Pyro Traveler. Unfortunately, honestly, I haven't leveled this up, but as you can see, 35% of a multiplier. This is quite pathetic. On top of that, Mavuika has her extra damage and extra buffs if you use her burst, although I don't regularly use it in this team. I think Mavuika works well even if you're just using her as a sub DPS for Clorinde. But for Raiden, it's actually very interesting about Mavuika, since she doesn't have a real burst. I'm sure you guys know by now, but that means she doesn't build the resolve stacks for Raiden, which means Raiden's multipliers are a lot weaker. But for my testing, what I noticed is this 40% damage buff that you get after using Mavuika's burst, it basically outweighs the loss of the resolve stacks.
There is no escape. Justice will prevail. Pyroclastic surge. Full throttle. No turning back. Now you shall perish.
384.
You asked for it. Pyroclastic surge. Try and stop. No turning back. Now you shall perish.
Oh my god!
Yeah, so there is a few issues. The first one is that you won't actually be able to burst on Mavuika that much, which means Raiden's damage will go down and Mavuika's damage will go down.
Illusion hands where I can see 'em. Light it up. No turning back. Inazuma shines eternal.
Yeah, 322. So without Mavuika's burst, you're doing less damage than Xiangling. So it's viable. It's definitely viable. I don't know if I'd go as far as to say it's Raiden's best overload team. Do note that I am using C1, so your resolve gain might be slightly different than mine, but that's what I experienced using C1. But yeah, you might be surprised by that, but that would then just make Mavuika just better than the Pyro Traveler, unfortunately, since the buffs are similar and then you're just getting Mavuika's better personal damage on top of that. That is assuming you are using Mavuika's burst, which, because Raiden doesn't do normal attacks and teams like this don't have Natlan supports to battery Mavuika, in practice you're probably not going to be bursting very often, and without that burst, Raiden's damage will be falling behind the other support options. And yeah, again, just like Clorinde, the Pyro Traveler is in between Xiangling and Bennett, in terms of he'll be buffing more than Xiangling, but his damage will be lower. But he won't be buffing as much as Bennett, but you'll have higher uptimes on buff without having to rely on a Pyro normal attack with Raiden, which, if you don't know, that's a tech you can do to extend your buffs with Bennett. And the last playstyle is Kinich teams. This is because Kinich doesn't really need anything fancy. All he really wanted was a Pyro or a Dendro Natlan character to hold the Scrolls artifact set for him. He couldn't get this buff in his old teams, and yeah, 40% damage bonus for him and for Emily is a big deal. All he wanted is a Natlan character, and we got 2 of them in this one patch. And yeah, both Traveler and Mavuika do this role nicely. Although I will say, because this Kinich team needed the bare minimum, Traveler does do this role very nicely as a free option, meaning you could either get Kinich's weapon or constellation instead of pulling Mavuika, or I guess you could save your Mavuika for another team and just use Pyro Traveler here for your Kinich team. And yeah, what's also cool is that Traveler's bad range doesn't matter nearly as much because, like I said, since he only need the bare minimum, his job is mostly to activate scrolls. It's not a big deal if you miss some of your hits. Just showing you an example on how to set up with his team and to get the scrolls buffs. So you can apply Dendro with Emily, switch to your Traveler. You can see the team has no buffs at the moment. Just use their stuff. There we go. You've got your 40% Dendro and your 40% Pyro. You can see it there and there, and then that will last for 20 seconds. Now, one disclaimer I'm sure you've seen with this team in many other videos already is explaining the issues with scrolls in burning teams and how it can't refresh buffs on enemies, since burning is basically kind of weird. Applying Pyro on a burning enemy again doesn't count as a new reaction. So what that means is you get this 40% damage buff for 20 seconds, but you might have issues after this 20 seconds is up. You can see it's gone down a bit now, and I won't be able to bring it up again because the enemy is burning, and like I said, there's that weird burning mechanic. It's now completely gone now. If I do that, because I did the reaction on Emily, it didn't come back, and yeah. So there is issues reapplying, that is true. But what I can say is it's not that big of a deal because, number one, most enemies you fight, unless it's a boss, probably aren't lasting longer than this 20-second buff you get from scrolls initially. Most of the game, unless you're either like really new or you're fighting a really difficult boss, your fights aren't going to be lasting more than 20 seconds. Number two, if it's an AOE fight, you could be refreshing scrolls many times. And number three, even if you can't refresh the buffs, having partial downtime is still going to be better than Kinich's previous teams, since the old supports like Toma or Dia were just doing the bare minimum. They were doing barely anything to help him anyway. Although I will say Dia and Toma, their shields and their survivability is quite nice, but buff wise they can't compare to a decent uptime Natlan support with the scrolls set. My overall first impression, I think Pyro Traveler seems pretty solid for Overload, Burgeon and Kinich teams, and let's be honest, that is definitely better than every other Traveler so far. Dendro Traveler is okay, but gets easily replaced once you have other Dendro options, let's be honest. Geo Traveler is also okay, but same thing, easily gets replaced once you have other Geo options, and the other Travelers are barely played at all. You could say this Traveler is carried by being able to equip the scroll set and being able to use Night Soul points in order to get the full 40% buff from the scroll set. That's just how Natlan characters are. They are balanced around the scroll set. That's just how it is, and it's quite nice. I've got this sort of build where you can try and build them for DPS, you can try and level up their talents, and then you've got a more EM focused build where you'll give them your EM pieces, maybe Flower of Paradise Lost, maybe Gilded Dreams. Still using Sacrificial Sword, and yeah, that will work well in the Burgeon teams. But I will say a pretty massive issue, and why I don't think this Traveler is amazing, is because of the AOE. And this skill is just so small, it's crazy. You might not notice it all the time, but when you do notice this skill not activating your Burgeons or whatever, it is very tragic. But you know, as I said before, the Overload teams and the Kinich teams, the AOE is less of an issue. And before you ask, don't even bother playing him with Mualani. Actually, you know what? Let me just show you what that looks like. You really do want to be in like single target and hugging enemies for this pyro application. But you know what? That does bring me to a point, which is in all the teams, like a team like this, if you do lack the other options, say for example, if you don't have constellations on Xiangling, you don't have Mavuika, then the Pyro Traveler can work. Just like for Overload teams, if you don't have Mavuika, if you don't have a built Bennett, or if your Bennett's on another team, if you don't have a built Xiangling, you don't have Xiangling constellations, then the Pyro Traveler works nicely there. And with Kinich as well, he's just a nice free-to-play option. And you know, that's good enough for a lot of people. Honestly, a character that's probably never the best, even in Burgeon teams, but they are a free option, a guaranteed option. And also what's underrated is, unlike normal characters, you can level up the Traveler just from doing the story, and as long as you have enough more, I guess. But you don't have to be grinding Ascension bosses like you would with a normal character. So yeah, those are my first impressions. It's neither that positive nor that negative, but maybe people will cook. I mean, they just released, maybe people will find out some new strategies, some more viable teams. And also, I believe we'll unlock their Constellation 6 in the future. Right now, I only have up to C4. These other constellations are just the story constellations. So maybe they'll get some extra viability here, but we'll have to see whenever we get that in the future. I hope you enjoyed this video, and yeah, thanks for watching. This was the Pyro Traveler.